Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today on Market Journal. I'm Bryce Duskett. We are wrapping up the first full week of the 6th month of the year. The month of June brings us long days as well as the official start to summer coming up here on the 21st. We know that producers are busy this time of year, so we appreciate you making time to join us on the program. Some people call it the Big White Combine or the Sky Shredder. Others refer to it as the nasty four-letter word that starts with an H. No matter what you call it, hail is never ideal, especially on crops in the midst of the growing season. Earlier this week, a storm moved through the state that left area crops beaten and dismantled. Being early in the growing season, your first thought might be to want to replant as soon as possible. But UNL Cropping Systems Specialist Justin McMechan says the most important thing to do is to wait. We caught up with him on Wednesday morning to learn more about what producers need to do following a hail event.
When it occurs, and so everybody wants to get out and make a decision, especially an early June hail date implies the potential for replant. But the biggest thing is wait 7 to 10 days. I always tell growers the best thing you do is take a couple photos and go to the lake. So that's the first thing is give it some time. Those plants need to regrow before we know what's going on.
7 to 10 days. I think there's going to be producers wanting to pull their hair out when they hear that.
Correct.
Why is that? Why do we need to wait 7 to 10 days?
Yeah, and you know, we can go a little bit earlier, but we have some nice time-lapse videos to show why you really want to wait 7 to 10. And in part, it's because we have a plant that's got a pretty significant amount of injury on it, whether it's corn or soybeans. And what we're really interested in at this point in the season is a viable growing point on that plant. And depending on the stage of development, mostly for corn, that growing point can be in a couple different places right now. For growers, we're hoping it's still below ground, although a lot of our early planted corn, it's going to be above ground. And so splitting stalks after 7 or so days gives us a pretty good idea if those are viable and going to be growing or not. Soybeans is a little bit easier, but it's still important to wait on soybeans just because we can have some stem damage below that.
You mentioned the fact that it is early June here when we saw this latest hail event. Some producers saw it earlier than this, but with this one we saw on Tuesday in particular. Talk about the timing of that and maybe some opportunities and challenges that brings on.
Yeah, and the opportunities is that our crops are fairly early in their development, both corn and soybeans. That has some advantage in terms of what the yield impacts would be if we don't see stand loss. For corn, we're in that critical transition period between what is V5, the number of collars that are on that plant, and V6 when that growing point comes above ground. So below ground growing points, if growers know they're prior to that, they're probably in pretty good shape. We still have to wait. And then for soybeans, if they're just popping out of the ground, they're pretty soft and fleshy tissue. It's easy to knock off growing points on those. So a little bit of growth on soybeans is good. Most of our early planted soybeans are about V2, V3 right now. And we looked at some fields this morning. They're doing okay, but it's hard to tell. 7 to 10 days.
So what have you learned? I mean, you've done a lot of research when it comes to hail. What have you learned about corn versus soybeans and their response to hail? Big picture.
Yeah, big picture. Okay, so soybeans has a lot of growing points on it, and so big picture on it is you got to remove that, or you got to have a viable growing point. So anything, as long as you have one little node above the soil surface, it's that cotyledonary node. So there's 2 little bits of fleshy tissue around that are small leaves. Those, as long as they're intact, you're in good shape with soybeans. You can remove all the vegetation above that. In fact, when those plants start to regrow, we'll get 2 stems coming off of those. So we can actually double our node count per day to an undamaged plant. Corn's a lot different. It's got that one growing point right in the center of that stem or stalk, depending on where that plant is in development. That needs to be viable for us to have a healthy plant in there. But right now, it's really anything prior to V7 in corn. It's all about live plant stand. So even though those plants can be tattered and the leaves can be shredded off, as far as we know, and research that we've done in our own lab shows there's not a lot of yield loss associated with that. It's mostly live plants.
Mm-hmm. So again, the big headline is wait at least 7 days, even up to 10 days before making a decision here. Who are some of the people you need to be in contact with, though, during that 7 to 10 days?
Yeah, if you've got a crop adjuster and you've got hail insurance, that's the first person you really want to be speaking with. They're going to tell you the same thing. We need to wait that 7 to 10 days. If you've got consultants that are checking fields, that's also the people you want to notify. And then, of course, extension. We are a source of a lot of information. We can come out and take a look at a lot of these fields. And so getting those resources in hand and communicating with those people, getting those photos in place too, and having some, it can be an important part of the insurance part of this too.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the research. I've seen firsthand some of the research that you've done with an ice machine to replicate hail.
Yeah.
Talk about that and what you've been able to learn over the past 5 years that we might not have known beforehand.
Yeah. So that simulated hail machine is actually a recently built one based on an older version that was back in the 1980s. It shoots ice at 170 miles an hour. It would replicate the hail event we saw yesterday pretty well. It's told us a lot. It's taken some of the shock out of these hailstorms for those that have seen its damage in the time-lapse camera footage that's available. There are some eerily similar photos to what we can do with that hail machine and then what that can look like 7 to 10 days later. And so if a grower's really kind of in panic mode, go and watch one of those videos. You can just see how much these crops can regrow in the next 7 to 10 days. We've done research too in terms of interaction with diseases and other things like that. That doesn't apply too much to our early season hail events, maybe with the exception of Goss's wilt in corn, but the growers who would know that they had a history of that. And that interaction really needs to happen as the hail event's occurring because those plants heal up pretty quick and they're not as susceptible to that. So there's a lot to learn in terms of hail damage. We're trying to get some objective evaluations in terms of using UAVs, and those things take time. Because it's such a different evaluation technique to what we're doing now, which is adjusters looking at plants in the field.
And of course, our viewers today can learn more at the Hail No website that Nebraska Extension has put together. I want to give you the final word, though, 30 seconds or so. What else do you want to add on this topic?
You know, that's the primary resource to go to. There are so many videos on there that growers can sit through and watch each crop and its response over time and in terms of what to do during those periods. And so I really recommend people get onto the website, go through and look at the various crops they might be dealing with. There's great information there.
The Hail No team has published countless articles, videos, and other online resources. You can access those online at the website cropwatch.unl.edu/hailno. You can also follow the Hail No team on Twitter. Their handle is @HailNoUNL. Moving on now, Nebraska Extension is gearing up for the 8th annual crop scouting competition for Nebraska youth. It is set to begin August 3rd. This event will be open for students across the state who are competing grades 5th through 12th. The 2022 crop scouting competition will feature the opportunity for participants to ask an agronomist questions about weeds, diseases, insects, and other general scouting information. The top 3 teams will be eligible for cash prizes when all is said and done.
So the youth actually have a chance to take a kind of a written exam or an online strategy, and within after the youth get done with that, they'll go out to the fields and actually have a chance to scout for some insects, some diseases. There might be some nutrient issues out there. So there is $500 that go to the first place team. So that money we've had some teams use to take field trips out of Nebraska, learn more about agriculture and other crop scouting programs. And the youth also will have a chance to receive a second and third place prize for $250 and $150 as well.
While many participants in this competition may be planning on running the family operation someday in the future, that isn't necessarily an option for everyone. That's why this competition gives individuals a glimpse at what it could be like to work in a variety of fields related to agricultural production here in Nebraska. In short, this competition is structured to provide students an opportunity to obtain knowledge and skills that will be helpful in the future for all their agricultural endeavors.
So maybe youth are not able to come back to a family farm or don't have those opportunities, but they can realize that there's a whole other sector of agronomy related careers such as pathology, entomology, and even risk management side. And so we've had a lot of youth express that it has helped them expose their interest to future careers. And by working with a sponsor, so that could be an FFA advisor, an extension educator. We've also had some agronomists serve as a mentor. They've had that chance to learn more about kind of through a shadowing experience about what that particular career actually involves.
If you are interested in participating in this year's competition, registration is currently open. The competition again will take place August 3rd at the NREC facility near Meade, Nebraska. Registration is due by July 15th, so there's still time to get your team assembled. You will need to appoint a coach. That could be anyone from extension faculty and staff to ag teachers and agronomists, or even an interested community member. If you are interested in this year's competition and you'd like to learn more, you can do so by visiting the website cropwatch.unl.edu. We've also taken the liberty of posting some additional information to the Market Journal website. As we shift our attention over to the grain market, this week we were joined by Heather Ramsey with the ARC Group. We covered a whole host of topics with Heather and began the conversation by getting her general take on the latest developments in the markets.
The last week has been quite the roller coaster between, thinking about possibly getting back all this Ukraine grain to then coming in Wednesday and realizing, oh, Ukraine wasn't even at the table when we were talking about this food corridor. So maybe it's not all coming back. So we've had that kind of yin yang going on. We've had the weather predictions be drastically different week over week. And so the market has just sort of done some consolidating from a fund perspective and then awaiting another spark. We're just really waiting for that next spark so that we can decide maybe which direction this thing should keep going, or what kind of the outlook is for the next couple months, honestly.
So if I hear you right, fundamentally the market is in good position, just trying to find some sort of news to either go up or down, right?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally this is a great spot for us to be at, with the expected crop size in the US on both corn and soybeans, kind of warrants these levels and or better. Honestly, from that standpoint, we really need a really, really good corn crop in the U.S. to sort of stabilize, grain production across the globe, as well as in the soybean crop, even more so in the soybean crop. We need that to be a really great soybean crop to really give any sort of surplus to the globe, so to speak. So any hint of a decrease to production or adverse weather that could be leading into some critical time frames, that is getting, a positive response on both the corn market, the soybean market, obviously in the wheat market. And we're coming into crunch time with wheat harvest here. And so we're really going to be looking for those on-farm field reports on wheat to determine what we do and don't have that we can supply the world with at this point.
Mm-hmm. As we talk about it being a weather market, we've seen some variety of forecasts. Is that a fair statement to say?
Yin yang is kind of what we've seen here over the last week. To go from, hey, the next 30 to 60 day window looks like it's slightly below normal temps and slightly above average moisture, to then coming in this week and nope, there's a significant ridge building through the central U.S. It looks hot, it looks dry. If you're a dryland farmer, the forecast this week gives you a little pause to be like, oh, I think we're good marketing right now. We need to sort of figure out how to protect ourselves without getting any more of those true, futures commitments in place and sort of letting this thing pan out for a little bit. Yeah.
On the topic of weather, earlier in the program, we talked about hail. Did you see some hail on your drive in today across Nebraska?
Unfortunately, I did. I'm in south central Nebraska coming into Lincoln, and there are some significant spots where there's hail. And I'm thankful that at this stage, it's early in the season. So most everybody should have enough flexibility in their plans from what they have marketed versus what's insured, that they can make those adjustments as needed. The one thing I've learned over my experience with marketing and dealing with hail on the farm is that slow decision making is better than knee-jerk reaction the next morning. You're devastated. And I know it's really hard because you spend a lot of time and effort putting that in the ground, but kind of evaluating where all those dollars and cents shake out in a per acre basis is the best way to go, and kind of figure out what should I be replanting. Maybe I'm past that replant date, which we are for corn, and is that the direction I need to go or not? So just like slow and concise and consistent decision making in that foray is definitely well advised.
As you look back over the past week, maybe 2 weeks, what are you seeing when it comes to cash markets across the area?
They're great. Here in central Nebraska, we've gone from, on old crop corn standpoint, seeing anywhere from, a 10 to 15 over basis to then going 45, as high as 45 over in the last couple days here. So really in weeks time, we've seen a 20-30 cent pop. And a lot of that is because of how long this planting season has taken. And then the spray follow up to all of the planting activities. And so it's just been out of the end user or out of a delivery mode for a little bit longer than expected. Some of that too is just how much is left on farm. You know, I know in looking at my client base, we have significantly less on farm this time of year than what we're used to having because prices have been so good leading up to that. We've also seen some of this competition in the old crop start breeding into new crop. Again, soybeans it's a real issue globally of where soybean production is coming from. And so trying to compete for those beans and be the first ones with your hand on them this fall, we're starting to see that. We're starting to see that in the basis market. And it's kind of exciting to know we're going to have some good opportunities there.
We do have a few U.S. Department of Agriculture reports, one due on Friday and then another due toward the later of the month, right?
Yes.
Tell us what you're watching in those.
You know, I'm really looking to see how much they change around wheat stocks on that Friday report. There shouldn't be too much of an increase. I think we're expecting a little bit of an increase because of an assumption that more Black Sea wheat could move. So looking at that number, really I'm geared up for the 30th and to know what those planted acres are. There's a lot of discussion about corn acres getting switched to soybeans. I think there should be also some questions around how much is double crop and how much is first primary crop in that instance. And then just how much prevent plant is out there, because that's been a big, huge rumor out there in the market, that some wild numbers. It'll be nice to see that on the 30th and kind of put that to bed and then be able to calculate where crop productions really, truly look like for each of those primary crops.
Heather, I want to give you the final word here, as we like to do. Final piece of grain marketing advice perhaps you'd like to share.
You know, I've always heard from a very well-spoken mentor of mine that, hey, if there's profit to be made, let's make it. And so I think that's kind of what we're using for 22. If there's profit to be made, let's make it. When you look out to 23, if there's profit right now to be made, I know that's hard to peg, then let's go ahead and make it. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, obviously.
Thanks again to Heather for joining us here on the program. Coming up next week, Darren Newsom of Darren Newsom Analysis will join us on the show. If you have a question for Darren, email us or get in touch with us on social media. Nutrients in the field count each and every year, but with a high cost of fertilizer this year, those inputs are especially on the radar for area producers. Ray Ward of Ward Laboratories in Kearney has decades of experience in soil health. In times like these, he's suggesting to look to manure applications for more boosting of microbial activity with practices like cover crops, and he suggests gaining a true understanding of what your soil test means. You can get all the details on making every dollar count in the June issue of the Nebraska Farmer. Well, it is now time for weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist and Market Journal chief meteorologist Al Dutcher. Well, Al, we talked about storms we saw over the past week a little earlier here in the program. As we look to the week ahead, what are you watching for?
Well, Bryce, we have seen an active weather pattern over this last week, and probably the worst of the activity was Tuesday and, of course, Thursday. And Tuesday's results in terms of severe weather reports across the state, at least 87 hail reports and 65 wind reports. We're still getting the data on the event on Thursday. Nevertheless, we were a little bit warmer than the models were indicating, and that allowed for more severe weather development instead of more stratiform rain being in the cooler side of the front. So that led to these very big, significant severe weather outbreaks that all pushed toward the south. A lot of western Kansas, southeastern portions of Colorado, Texas Panhandle, Oklahoma Panhandle, seen some very significant hail and rainfall damage to their crops. We've seen some isolated reports in Nebraska to hail damage to some of the emerging crops. We're a little bit farther behind than we normally are, so maybe the damage won't be nearly as excessive as it would be if we were in the 10-12 leaf stage at this time of the year. That being said, it does look like we're going to see a warmer pattern this weekend before a brief cool down and then a renewed warming trend that looks to be fairly long-lived developing as we get to the second half of next week. As we go to the upper air miles, the first thing I'll draw your attention to is we have this ridge to the southwest that's going to be building toward the north as the weekend progresses. So we're going to see temperatures in the 90s across the southwestern part of the state, and we're going to be looking at probably the mid to upper 80s across the northeast part of the state. Low pressure at the surface in southeastern portions of Minnesota. We'll carry the precipitation band toward our northeast. We're going to be fairly high and dry. Now, as we get into Sunday, we see the ridge building in, but a little piece of energy is going to try to move around the edge of that ridge, and that may bring some precipitation to portions of northern and eastern Nebraska as low pressure sets up in southwestern Kansas. The models are having a difficult time with the placement of this precipitation, but the best bet is the eastern one-third of the state. Now on Monday, this trough starts to progress in, so we'll start to see a cooling trend across the western part of the state with low pressure at the surface. In southeast Nebraska, we're probably going to be looking at temperatures in south central Nebraska basically in the mid to upper 90s, maybe even some low 100s. There is a chance for scattered shower activity on Tuesday. This front starts to move across the northern plains. Still going to leave southeast Nebraska in the very warm sector. We should make it up into the low to mid 90s. We'll be looking at more into the upper 70s to low 80s across the northern part of the state. Most of the primary precipitation is going to move well to the north of us. On Wednesday, we see that trough rapidly moving toward the Great Lakes, and we're going to start to see high pressure building back in. So our temperatures are going to start to take a little bit of a rebound, particularly across western Nebraska, where we'll return back into the 80s. Now, there is a weak cool front that is trying to move through the state, but it doesn't look like it's going to be anything significant. And then we see this big bubble starting to build up, and this is where the heat starts to come in earnest. Low pressure over northwestern Kansas is more of a thermal low. We're not expecting much in the way of any significant moisture with this system, but we are going to see very hot temperatures as we return back to the 90s. And as we go into the day on Friday, we see that ridge building all the way up into South Dakota. It looks like we could be looking at some triple-digit heat, particularly across the southwest and south central part of the state, as we're basically void of any precipitation, as most of it will stay up into the Pacific Northwest. If we look even farther, the CPC, the Climate Prediction Center, indicates that that ridge will hold in place somewhere between the 22nd and 23rd before it starts to break down. So well above normal temperatures, primarily 90s into the low 100s is going to be a common feature. And in terms of precipitation, with that ridge in place, we wouldn't expect much in the way of any moisture.
Thank you, as always, Al. Finally today, some cattle producers opt for summer calving. If you're doing so, you want to make sure your calves are getting the right amount of nutrition. Colostrum is the first milk produced after calving. It has a different composition than milk, as it plays an important role in being the first meal a calf receives. Market Journal intern Madison Kreifles recently discussed this topic with an extension educator to learn more.
It is essential for newborn calves to drink their mother's milk immediately after they are born. This milk will help boost the calf's immune system and prevent health issues.
So colostrum is the first milk that cow produces. It has several different ingredients that are really important for calf health, and that's going to set it up for the rest of its life. The main one that we always hear about is the immune support, so the immunoglobulin IgG, which is basically antibodies from mom. The mom will actually put those antibodies into the colostrum, and then that calf will absorb those across the intestinal lining. And it also contains some white blood cells, which is another form of the immune system for the calf that helps locally prevent any sort of pathogens that might be affecting it. But in addition to that, it is also a really good source of protein and energy. That's what helps that calf really get up and get the vigor to get going once it's born. In fact, it's about double the amount in just the regular milk that's formed from the cow. So it's very rich in that. And then the final thing is vitamins. So it does contain vitamin A and E. Vitamin A is an immune stimulant, so that also just helps protect that immune system. And then vitamin E acts as an antioxidant, so any sort of inflammation that calf might be experiencing.
There are several negative effects that stem from a newborn calf not receiving the correct amount of colostrum from the mother.
Well, if a calf does not get the colostrum intake, then we label, potentially they will not build up their immune system. So those calves now will gain this condition called failure passive transfer. So failure passive transfer calves have been researched multiple times across the area, and we know that these calves will actually have an increased risk of being sick and or dying before weaning. And then if they do make it past weaning, we know that their weaning weights are going to be a lot less than their counterparts that have got a good amount of colostrum. And once they get into the feeding period, they actually have a lower average daily gain than the rest. So their performance overall is stunted.
There is a small time frame in which the calf should drink its mother's colostrum. If the first meal is not consumed in this window, it will begin to cause negative effects on the calf's health.
So timing becomes extremely important in this situation. So when that cow will actually put those antibodies into her colostrum, and then the calf will take the first meal, there is this certain time frame when those antibodies can be absorbed across the intestinal lining. The first 4 hours is key. So we have the best absorption that calf is going to get. We know that when we get to 12 hours of age, over half of those absorption sites have actually closed. And when you get to 24 hours, so 1 day old, we have almost complete gut closure, meaning none of those antibodies are going to be absorbed into the immune system. So now that calf is going to have a much harder time fighting off any sort of pathogens that it might be exposed to.
Understanding that not every situation is perfect, there are alternatives to colostrum if the mother and calf can no longer meet after birth.
Yeah, so fortunately, we do have different options available. I always like to start by saying mother knows best. So if you do potentially have her caught, so if you pulled a calf, then it's really important to try and milk her out and provide that colostrum to the calf yourself so that you know that calf has gotten what it needs. But I understand we don't always have those perfect situations. And so if you are not able to get that pair back together, then there are different options out on the market. So you can potentially actually save some from your herd. So if you unfortunately had a dam that lost her calf, you can collect that colostrum and freeze it. And it is good for a year. Keep it in Ziploc bags in the freezer, and then do a slow thaw to use that when you need it on your calf.
Although colostrum is essential to the development of a newborn calf, we must always be prepared for the worst case scenario to ensure we continue to produce healthy calves.
Calving season, I understand there's a lot of things that are out of our hands, especially Mother Nature. So it's easy to say that you aren't going to be able to see 100% of your calves get the amount of colostrum that they need. However, if you understand how colostrum's formed and the timing that's important there, and then you create a solid management plan that also includes a nutritional program for your cows and a really good veterinary relationship, then I think with those tools, you can be prepared for anything that comes at you.
A calf's first meal dictates the remainder of its life. Whether this is done naturally by consuming the mother's colostrum or altered due to complications, the first meal should be filled with antibodies to boost the immune system, have a good source of protein, and boost energy to ensure a healthy life for the newborn calf.
Thank you for that story, Madison. If you would like to learn more about colostrum and the important role it plays for your calves' development, you can find all that information and more online at beef.unl.edu. We've also posted a helpful link alongside this story at the Market Journal website. Well, that is going to do it for this week's show. For more Market Journal content, be sure you subscribe to the show on YouTube. We hope to see you back here next time. Until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.